Hello, everybody, and welcome to Chapter 5, Epistemology, the Study of Knowing. How are you today, Scott?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
Great, great. We were just doing a little bit of a prep talk before we got on here, guys, and we are really getting into the sort of the core DNA of the entire reality atlas map, And so Chapter 5, it's really the meat and potatoes of the entire model. It's quite a big chapter. So we have decided to break it into how many parts, Scott?
3 parts, of course. 3 is on the cover of the book. It's so much part of my thinking and a part of the way that the transcendentals kind of have a trinity, which is also a unity. And we'll kind of be coming back to that theme again and again in this book of the trinity that's also the one.
Yeah, exactly. And so we've got 3 parts. I'm going to call them, Scott, universal mind, world mind, and soul mind. Is that correct?
That works for me. Yeah. They also can be labeled in another way to say the intelligible domain is the domain of universal mind. The world mind would be the visible domain, and the soul mind would be in the invisible domain. So I'm borrowing a bit from Plato, who's the one who kind of labeled the intelligible as a thing. And I'm kind of appropriating that Platonic term for this largest of all minds, the universal mind. Beautiful. And then I just applied visible and invisible because that's kind of how we see things. We see the visible world around us that we can weigh and measure. And we also call that the world. And we use science to investigate that. But there's also another domain which exists called the invisible, which is the domain of soul. And the problem that scientists have with that is that they can't weigh and measure it, so they don't believe it exists. But I think we have traditions going back thousands of years that talk a lot about the soul, and so that's where we would put that. All of those ideas would fit on the invisible side.
Yeah. And because I was enjoying reading the book today, Scott, and I'm so close to your work now, having worked with you when you were writing the book and through our conversations, I feel very close to the model now. But I'm just thinking for people who are coming across it for the first time, actually, I'm hoping to be the kind of the ally on the journey for you, dear viewer or listener, to try to give you, some stepping stones to get your head around this, because on one level, it's quite simple. And I'm hoping to sort of lay it out in those baby steps in terms of how I've been able to build a bridge to understanding this model. I really love it and I really resonate with it personally. And it's kind of been, it's been an evolution for me to sort of like, I've taken an extra step in my own worldview and reality envelope, courtesy of this model, I know
one thing you were saying earlier, Geoff, to me privately, was that some of the models that you've grown to love over your life's journey, such as Groff's model and a lot of different things in psychology, sort of fit really nicely into this model.
Perfectly.
And so I've integrated, a lot of thinking that I've learned across my life into this model. And I find that this framework is actually needed to hold all of those parts together in a way. Otherwise, you just end up with kind of disjointed understandings of this system or that system. And you get all these kind of, systems that work.
I know.
But they neglect whole other domains of experience. And so this book is my attempt to kind of throw an umbrella over all of that and kind of make sense of it in some way.
Yeah. And so whatever worldview you might have, if we're doing our job right here, what we're hoping to do is that the worldview you currently hold will sit perfectly into this model in a way that'll make sense, and maybe there'll be like extra like little tributaries or tentacles out of this model that might give you a nice framework to hold your existing worldviews. Can I just give a simple outline, Scott, because I really find it helpful, the simple diagram with the circles, so this is video one of three parts for chapter 5. Okay, video 1 is going to speak about universal mind. Video 2 is going to speak about world mind. And video 3 is going to speak about soul mind. Okay. And so Scott has basically put together a very simple diagram, which is like one big circle with two little circles inside it. Right. And I will show a graphic of that here, and it's in the book anyway. So that's and we spoke last time in ontology, in the study of being, about the absolute. We kind of gave this sort of like, I suppose it was like a courtesy call to that, like, everything rests on that non-dual premise that everything arises out of this absolute realm or whatever. And now what we're talking about is the first big circle, if you like, called universal mind. And Scott has 3 words for this. And I say this with, with love and kindness, Scott, but sometimes I trip myself up with the 3 words. So it's called universal mind, it's called the intelligible, and it's called a relative. So sometimes when Scott's speaking, he'll use those terms, but they're basically interchangeable, are they, Scott? Am I correct in that?
They do have subtle differences. So the relative would refer to any type of mind, any type of finite, bounded, limited experience. And that would distinguish it from the absolute, which is the opposite. It's boundless, infinite, no preferences, and we talked about that last time. But now we're getting into this idea of having boundaries. And perhaps the clearest way to represent that two-dimensionally is to draw a circle. And so the circle represents the boundary, inside of which is the universal mind. And the sand that you draw this on the beach is, let's say, awareness. So out of this infinite sea of awareness, we draw this circle, and now we have a universal mind. Okay. So
got it.
But remember that universal mind is experienced by awareness. So awareness that is inside of this boundary takes on this form. It has this information, and that act of informing awareness in this finite boundary creates the self, because awareness says, wait a minute, I experience a boundary for the first time. And it's like awareness takes this point of view then of this individual who has limitations with respect to the absolute. And so that's the fundamental creation of the I am this boundary, you see, because you're experiencing this boundary, and then you identify with it. You say, well, this must be who I am, I guess, because that's as far as I can take myself, you see, before dissolving into the absolute. And so that's our very, very important first move into the relative, is to form this boundary. And then we'll talk later in the other subparts here about the circles inside of universal mind. But before we go there, let's kind of discuss what is the nature of universal mind. And Plato called this the intelligible domain. And it's amazing to me that even as human individuals, we have access to this intelligible domain of universal mind. And what lives there is geometry, mathematics, and you could make the case that the transcendentals are also there. Although the transcendentals are forms, they're words, they're ideas. And so as words and ideas and forms, they belong in universal mind.
Would you mind, Scott, if I ask you just to call out what the transcendentals are again, because you can never hear them enough.
And again, this was Plato's idea, the transcendentals. He called them truth, beauty, and goodness. And I'm kind of rebranding that as truth, beauty, and bliss, because I prefer the older Vedic Sat Chit Ananda. And Ananda has more of a connotation of bliss, but it is also profoundly good. So you could use those terms synonymously, but I think that bliss gets more to the point that I'm trying to take you is that that's more of the experience that you have when you focus on being. Yeah, it's a blissful quality, which is also profoundly and wholesomely good. But whenever you have that experience, it also has this kind of profound truth to it. There's some incredible truth to that condition of transcendental bliss. And there's also an exquisite beauty in that truth and in that bliss. And so whenever we experience any one of the transcendentals, when we introspect on it a little bit, we realize that we have the other two. And so this is the primary example of the Trinity that is also a unity. So it's kind of like, almost like non-duality, but it's like non-triality in a sense that it's three and it's also one. So it's ultimately a paradox, because what these are different. They correspond to the different ways that we perceive information. We have sensations, perceptions, and conceptions, and these correspond to these streams of universal mind. Okay, so when we sense something, it's like.
Can I, Scott? Do you mind? I'm sorry to jump in here. I don't want to break your flow,
no,
but I just want. I just want to sort of bring people with us a little bit, because I totally get what you said about this boundary that's drawn in universal mind. And it's the first time there's kind of a relative form, if you like. It now has an edge, where it never had that in the absolute. And so in your model, you kind of, let's maybe start at the furthest point out, where we have you maintain that universal mind is essentially like the big circle of all that is, essentially. And then you cascade downward all the way down through the levels of, like the universes, the galaxies and planets and people and individual identities. What I'm trying to make reference to is that principle of relative and finiteness kind of happens at all levels, doesn't it? It cascades all the way up and cascades all the way down to the individual level. So, because sometimes we can jump from talking about a universe or all that is as the intelligible down to a finite individual self. And sometimes it can be hard to kind of bounce between those two points on the spectrum. But that's right. The principle of relative is...
Yeah, the way that all of this works mathematically is like a fractal or a non-integer dimension, it's been called, where it has this quality of self-similarity. Another way of thinking of that is the Hermetic idea of as above, so below. And so there's this resonance that's set up in the macrocosm. It resembles the microcosm, or the microcosm resembles the macrocosm, because they're made out of the same kind of mathematics, ultimately. And so you can represent that geometrically by a big circle, right? This is the simplest way we can do it. And then inside of that, you can have a smaller circle. And then inside of that one, you can have a smaller circle. And then you can go all the way down, like layers of the onion. You can have a great complexity within that. But it's not just this kind of concentric circles going all the way down. There's more to it. There's kind of like, there's essentially two different parts within universal mind, as that we've mentioned. And so it's more, it has kind of more of a commonality with the old yin yang diagram, in a sense, where you have the two circles kind of, having a relationship to each other. And so the diagram kind of calls that out. And it also has a kind of mirroring to the human brain. And the structure of the human brain has these two hemispheres that are joined by the corpus callosum, and they're kind of floating in the cerebrospinal fluid inside the skull, which is sort of, you can think of as like the universal quality of it, as the one mind. And then inside of that, you have these two different minds, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. So it's kind of a beautiful metaphor for the larger structure that I'm proposing here. But it's also, be careful when you think about the human mind, because it all exists in the visible domain. The brain is a physical object. And so it fits actually within world mind. but its structure suggests the larger structure that I'm talking about. I don't know if that makes sense, or if I'm kind of diving in maybe too quickly.
No, like it's no, it does make sense. I think like the way I understood it was when you explain it in terms of like the first boundary is like universal mind, you know, and that happens. So you can have a boundary of like all that is, you know, and that's kind of a big boundary, you know. But then we can experience that just on a very personal, individual level. So that would be, you know, Alan Watts has the term the skin encapsulated ego. So on a physiological level, it's just we all have bodies, and our bodies meet the outside world here where our skin is, you know. So there's a kind of a boundary physiologically there, you know. But there's also a boundary in terms of who we believe ourselves to be, you know. I'm this kind of person, I'm a father of two, I live in Ireland, I'm from Dublin, I'm interested in sacred geometry, I run a business, and blah, 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 blah. I think I'm all these things, you know, and I have a certain circle, you know, maybe you could even, you know, these circles are physiological, they're social, they're psychological, you know, that we all have these boundaries we draw for ourselves, and what's within that boundary is who we think we are as individuals, and what's outside of that boundary is like what we think we're not.
So all of those complexities that you're starting to get into would be on the soul side of the street. So you have an individual soul that has its boundary, and it involves all of those psychological and spiritual aspects. But then you have a physical body, the meat, the kind of skin encapsulated, you know, human
atoms and molecules and cells.
That is also a kind of forms a boundary, you know.
Yeah.
It has a it's not just a circle, it has a particular shape, but the circle is just the simplest representation that we have. My cat's on the desk here.
Very Matrix X, you know, it would almost look like a black cat to give us a little glitch in the Matrix. You know, it's perfect. Yeah.
Actually, I have two cats in here. They're kind of.
What are their names actually, Scott?
Coco and ZB.
Coco and ZB. Who's that?
They're siblings. Yeah.
Siblings. Okay. You feeling any deja vu? Are you okay? There's no glitch?
No.
You're all right? Okay, cool. I'm okay. I'm good too. No glitch in my matrix right now. Sorry, we digress, you know. So well, look, let me bring it back to you then. You know, it's kind of, what else would you like to say about the intelligible domain?
Well, maybe I can just read a quote here from my book.
Yeah.
The intelligible was given its name by Plato and is essentially what Immanuel Kant called a priori knowledge millennia later. Although I have gone with Plato's term here, Kant had basically the same idea in referring to the intelligible domain which comes prior to individual experience and sensation, a domain that we can all access. So it's something that comes before experience because it's made out of pure thought, pure intelligence. It's made out of the transcendentals, out of geometry and math. Eckhart Tolle says, behind the world of appearances, there is a vast intelligence that creates continuously. And I believe that he's referring to the intelligible domain of universal mind. It's this vast intelligence. And if you have a brief experience of that, it has that vastness to it, that kind of unbelievable spaciousness, you know. And I think it's really a scale issue of going from your point where you are right now as a very like limited bounded, and you're going up like through so many layers of the onion, and you're experiencing the outermost layer of the onion, you know, and you're just like, wow, this is huge, you know, and amazing. And beyond that, there's just the absolute, you know. And so it has that kind of quality that we might call God, you know. And so we're kind of tempted to call that God, but it really is, it's just domain that you have access to.
Yeah, and you make the point that it's like at the source of the universal mind, Scott. You say that like that's where mathematics and geometry reside, don't you? Like it's kind of, this is like the one universal language, if you like. And you make the point about, is there only one language? Is there only one? And I think that's a nice point. It's like you actually make the claim, yes, there is only one language of mathematics. There's not like 15 different languages of mathematics.
You can say, if you look at mathematics, you can say there's lots of branches of mathematics and different areas of focus, but they're all true. And they're all just, sometimes a certain area is more convenient than another to solve a particular practical problem. Mm-hmm. But when you get into mathematics, you realize the profoundly interconnected nature of it.
Yeah.
That you can't say that there's a kind of Chinese mathematics and then there's its totally separate, Indian mathematics. I mean, historically, mm-hmm. maybe these cultures found out different things at different times, but what I'm saying is that they're referencing something that's already there. Mm-hmm. And so mathematics is discovered rather than being a product of human invention. It's something that we come upon and go, oh yeah, this has always been there. And that's why it has this universal quality. And we speculate that if we could communicate with extraterrestrials, we would probably use some kind of geometry to communicate, because it's something that's what we probably, the only thing we have in common maybe is this universal language out of which the universe is made. So it would be a good way to try to communicate with another culture that you have no knowledge of. Because
this language applies.
That's what comes before everything, before culture, before other everything else. It's underlying the matrix,
You say, like, if there were more than one universal mind, it follows that there would be more than one universal language.
Right. And we have not experienced that.
Yeah.
So therefore, there must be only one universal mind.
Yeah. And so I like the idea of, like, geometry as a source field, that it's like it brings you very, very far out, like as in far out beyond my little bounded self. When I begin to reflect upon like mandalas or like the imagery of like beautiful harmonious geometry, you don't have to have a mathematical bone in your body, by the way, to experience this. I think one of the most beautiful things I've witnessed is when you see somebody look at a pristine piece of geometry, they're touched somehow. It deep down, I've seen this happen over and over with people that have no interest in geometry or mathematics, but somehow they're affected in the most beautiful, deep, profound way.
Because they're experiencing the qualitative aspect of math or geometry, the qualities of it that you have access to as consciousness.
Yeah.
I think that the quantitative and the mathematical aspects of geometry only deepen your appreciation for it. But they do require a different mode of cognition to appreciate them. And it's more work, honestly.
Yeah.
To, structure your mind in these ways, to get there. But implicit in that same geometry that you find beautiful are all of the seeds of how to think clearly and how to become rational and how to kind of become more, more intelligent or more, more clear thinking, I guess would be a better way of saying it.
There's a nice metaphor from the Buddhist tradition, I absolutely love mandalas and the traditional sand mandalas in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is like this pristine sacred art form, and many people have probably seen what I'm talking about, but essentially they create these absolutely sublime geometric shapes, which encode all of their scripture and their prayers essentially, but they're absolutely beautiful. But the purpose of the exercise, if you like, it's to present a kind of they actually are temples, you know, and they allow you walk into the temple, and embedded in the mandala are what they call seeds of enlightenment. And when you look at it, if you have the good fortune to see one being made, what the monks are doing is they're gifting you, like planting these seeds of enlightenment, because the geometry carries the perfection of those transcendentals, as you call them, truth, beauty, and goodness. And whether, you know, the apple is ready to fall from the tree, everybody's in a different place, in a different lifetime, you know, it may not happen right there in that moment. You know, it can happen like in 40 years or 50 years or 50 lifetimes in the Buddhist tradition, you know, but it's kind of beautiful that these are like a transmission of seeds of enlightenment, that the geometry carries this, you know, that once it goes in, it's in there and will blossom in time, you know?
Yeah, and it's sort of a mysterious process, because it's not so linear of like, you know, one step and then the next step. It's kind of like, how does that work? You see this geometry and it kind of works on you in the background or something. And then suddenly you get these kind of upgrades that you kind of maybe feel were connected with that experience somehow. But another way is like, if you do a geometric meditation, you do feel transported into almost like another realm, another domain.
You do
a very spacious kind of place, which is the experience of universal mind.
And that's what I love about your model, Scott, because it gives me a framework of understanding, if you like, because I temperamentally, for whatever reason, have just been predisposed to getting quite unlocked quite quickly by geometry. And over my journey with it, I've had these very deep, you know, profound kind of experiences where I've just felt expanded outward into something way bigger than the little me, you know. It's something I really cherish. But to be honest, like for most of my life, I've been like, I mean, I've no idea what's going on there, you know. But when you speak about like geometry being kind of like woven through the very deepest levels of the fabric of reality, then it sort of makes sense to me that, well, if we then choose to like rest our hearts and minds upon this language, which is the source code of everything that is, then of course we're going to be brought into deep spaces. It just makes perfect sense. So I really like the way you claim that, like in this kind of like universal mind space, that its language is I know you say mathematics, and I latch on to geometry because that's the thing that's dear to my heart. But I know there's a lot more than just pure geometry there. It's really,
well, geometry would be kind of like the perception of mathematics. It would be like the visual aspect of it. And I remember there's a quote by Stephen Hawking who said something like, I don't like the equations are the boring part of math. I like to see things in the most exciting way, which is in terms of geometry.
Wow.
And so I thought that was interesting, that he was always apparently striving to see the truth geometrically.
Wow.
And so it's a priority that we have as humans of seeing. We have such a great facility with visual perception. Mm-hmm. And when we see it, then we can say to understand it in some way. Mm-hmm. But it's also possible to think about it, to think about the equations, and to you know, do algebra, for example. You may recall, doesn't have a visual component, but it is something that that you're thinking about. And it's funny, like I was pretty good at math, but I always visualized everything. So I always imagine the numbers moving around on one side of the equation to the other, and I always had some kind of visual tricks I would use in my mind that made it easy for me. And so I was kind of taking shortcuts there using the visual aspect. And then I told people about that, like, wait, they couldn't believe it. Like, they don't do that. And I just thought it was the most natural thing, you know. And I think that that's just one of the ways of understanding of mathematics, is by perception and what we would call that as geometry.
Right? Well, actually, this brings us along nicely, Scott, because let's stay with the book. Sorry, I know we're digressing, but I think they're nice digressions. I hope they're nice for people for us to share. But I'm just thinking, we spoke about that nice triad of the transcendentals, but you love triads. And the other one is, you speak about like sensations, perceptions, and conceptions. So we're kind of getting to that here. And so maybe you could just frame what you mean by that. Like, how does that particular triad fit into this part of the book?
There's a unified trinity of all information coming into your mind. And we can introspect on that and kind of pull it apart. And we would say that the first level would be the sensations that you're getting. You're getting sensations through the five senses. And for example, you're seeing something in your room, and all those photons are hitting your retina. It's transmitted into electrical signals. It's going through your brain, and then it's perceived. And so perception is the secondary level of information processing, which would be, you perceive that visual information now, let's say as a chair. You go, oh yeah, that's a chair. But that's making sense out of the raw visual data. That would be the sensation data coming in. So sensations include visual imagery, but they also include things that you feel in your body, things that are like in your heart, things in your arm, wherever it is, you feel it inside your body or on the surface of your skin. Those are all different. That's like touch sensations that you're getting. But then a perception would be like recognizing that feeling that you're having in your chest is actually the feeling of joy that you're having. And then but usually you don't go all the way down to the level of sensation. You don't really analyze your experience so much, and you just have this feeling of happiness. And so you're largely sort of unaware of the sensations unless you explicitly sort of introspect on it. But then there's a third level of information processing that takes place, and this is largely in the brain of what I would call conception. And conception mixes the streams and connects it with memory. So you have a sensation coming into your eyes that you then perceive as a chair, but then you think about the chair and you think, oh, that looks like a really uncomfortable chair, based on all of your experiences with chairs in the past. And so that would be a tertiary level of information processing on the raw data. Okay, this is all very technical, but these
No, it's really beautiful. You're explaining it really well.
So there are these three levels of information processing that take place. But for you just experience it all like as one experience. You see the chair and you think, I'm not going to sit in that chair. That looks pretty uncomfortable. Yeah. And you don't need to go, analyze the raw sensor logs that are coming in from your eyes. And you don't need to kind of, go through this whole process, but it's available to you should you want to tease it apart and kind of put these sensations into different categories. But in truth, that trinity of sensations, perceptions, and conceptions is experienced as a unity of information flowing through your mind. So that, again, that impossible triangle on the cover of the book kind of represents that. Yeah.
This guy here.
So it's like there's three aspects, but they're really experienced as one.
We have sensations, we have perceptions, and we have conceptions. I like your metaphor of the chair. And one thing I love teasing out as well is that, that's kind of like a process, it sounds like to me, and I'm curious about, where does feeling sit into that mix? So say stuff comes in, like we have a chair comes in, and let's say it's just like a chair. Probably I feel quite neutral about chairs. I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other. So it's probably not going to evoke a strong feeling. But if I get something like a rainbow come in, I love rainbows. I think they're beautiful. You know, I associate them with all the other times I saw rainbows, and I get a warm feeling, you know. And I'm just like, you know, or a person I adore, a person I love, I see, you know, they then come in, you know, and then I go, oh my God, I love this person. Then I get this warm feeling of love, this good feeling, you know. And the same is like, there's stuff like I fear, you know, like I don't like to think about war, for example, or I'm scared of war. And if I see war stuff come in, I'm going to get a different feeling to the rainbows or the person I love, you know. But I'm pretty sure it's in your model, but I'm just curious about where would feeling fit into that triad?
So I would classify that all of those feelings that you have as prioritizing perception. So you're perceiving the rainbow, and you have a preference. You love it, and it's bringing in a bit of conception, because you're bringing in the memories of all the rainbows you've seen in the past. And you know that you love rainbows, but you don't get lost in the mind of thinking about rainbows and all the times you've seen it. Instead,
you're kind of here.
You're just in the moment of looking at the rainbow, and in your heart, and you're like, I love rainbows, you know. Yeah. What that is a perception. You're focusing and you're prioritizing that particular stream. Now, if you were to go off on a tangent and think about all the times you've seen rainbows and try to remember the dates, now you're in conception. Now you're prioritizing mental activity in your mind, in your brain, rather than staying in your heart. And so
is conception thinking? Conception
is more thinking, and perception is more feeling, and sensation is more being.
Okay.
So we have this kind of trinity, and there's different ways of talking about it, different terms we can use. Just like we're saying, I have like multiple terms for the same thing. They're not always synonymous. They tend to have their magnetic attraction to one of the poles, but they do carry their own like subtle differences, you know. And I think I as an individual, Scott, I kind of am more prioritizing conception. I'm more in my head than most people. And I know a lot of people who are more in their heart. And although they can think, they don't prioritize that aspect. They prioritize the emotion that they get. And
it's like we have a dominant disposition, or like a certain trait is kind of maybe more pronounced, you know. I think I'm probably more of a feeling person than a conceptual person, I guess. I mean, I know we're all blends of these things.
We're all blends, and we can't just be one to the exclusion of the others. But yeah, you could say we have a kind of psychographic profile where we have certain predilections for certain types of information that we tend to savor more than others.
Yeah, because I quite like the idea of you know, a lot of my human experiences, like, you know, so the world will come in. I love the guy Michael Singer. He wrote a great book there, The Surrender Experiment, you know, and but he made the point that like, so stuff comes in, whatever it is you're looking at, or whatever it is you're giving your attention to, that's going to come in. And then you're either going to like that stuff, not like that stuff, or be neutral to that stuff, you know. And it's in your response to that, you create this feeling field, you know. So I like rainbows, I'm going to feel good. I like chairs, I'm going to be kind of neutral. I don't like war, I get scared. I don't like, I'm going to push it away. And then that sort of starts the whole cycle of that whole Buddhist dance of craving or desiring or becoming attached to the rainbows and pushing away war and nasty things, you know, aversion.
And I've noticed that a lot of people get they get kind of lost in their preferences. They kind of get lost in their love for rainbows, for example, their hatred of war. And they kind of rehash that, and they go around and around with that, and they can never seemingly escape from that cycle of preferences. But what that is an experience of ego, of staying within your boundary, of having all these things that have developed over the course of your lifetime that define your preferences. And I would say a really powerful thing might be to explore non-duality and to transcend all of your preferences and experience this boundless preferencelessness state of of transcending that. And because awareness has no limitations, it has no preferences. It's kind of amazing to consider that. But that preferences are really bound up with your development and your individuality.
Yeah. And I suppose one of the pitfalls for Rainbow Boy here is like, I like rainbow so much, then I want to feel good, I don't want to feel bad. So then the pitfall is that I'm going to wake up every morning and go, right, I need to see rainbows, and so I can only feel good now if I see rainbows. And so if, oh no, there's no rainbows, I can't feel good till there's a rainbow. Yeah, so you're kind of setting yourself up.
That can be, and it could be, it doesn't have to be rainbows, it could be anything. But people kind of become addicted to this this kind of limitation.
Yeah, in order to feel okay, I need something out here to be a certain way, and I think like all the spiritual teachers that I admire, they point to actually the happiness we seek is a simple surrendering to that, and where you just lie back into actually allowing the truth, beauty, and goodness, or the truth, beauty, and bliss arise. And it allegedly, when you are able to let go of the sort of the trap of preferences, it arises naturally. We've all had glimpses of this. We've all had moments where we go, oh my God, this is what it's about,
So like Leo Tolstoy was a famous writer, and he had a great quote that kind of gets to the heart of what you're saying there. If you want to be happy, be.
Yeah.
So just prioritize sensation, prioritize focusing on the breath.
Yeah.
Prioritize just being and not thinking or feeling, just being. And that will kind of get you closer to that experience of transcendent bliss, which is beyond preferences. It's beyond satisfying particular conditions that make you happy as an ego, but it lets you transcend through that channel.
Scott, I want to ask you as well. I mean, I'm pretty certain this is the case, but just to double check with you. So we spoke about the triad of the transcendentals, right? Truth, beauty, bliss, as you call it, Satchitananda, which is the same principle from the Vedic tradition. And the triad then of sensation, perception, and conception, they're lined up, aren't they? Like they're basically mirrors in a different octave or at a different level, but they are connected, aren't they?
So like if you're putting me on the spot, but I'm going to try to remember. So truth would line up with conception because it's about thinking, right? And I would say that beauty would have to line up with perception. Because you're perceiving something in the world that you experience as beautiful, as beauty. And Plato said, the beauty of one form is akin to the beauty of another, and that beauty in every form is one and the same. So he's kind of getting to this archetype of beauty, this transcendent quality of beauty that's in all things, if you know how to look at it. And
truth.
Then the last thing would be bliss, and that would be associated with sensation. I've got it now.
Okay.
So when you're just sensing the breath, meditating, that's where you go into this quality of bliss, of being. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it does. It's kind of, I'm just making baby steps and lining those two up. It's not that important. It's not like a deal breaker for this model, but I like the way there's a consistency in your thinking, and when you lay out.
It also fits with the way that our minds have to break everything up into subjects, objects, and predicates. There's a kind of trinity of the way that we have to think that lines up with the data streams that we have in our mind, the sensations, perceptions, and conceptions. And again, it lines up with the transcendentals, because that's the highest universal minds, sensations, perceptions, and conceptions. So there's this fundamental trinity running through all things. Even in world mind, we have protons, we have neutrons, and we have electrons. We have this fundamental trinity that we have to represent matter. And so there's this kind of satisfying trinity to all things. And that reminds me of another aspect that
that's actually in this chapter.
He claimed that 3 is the first number to which the term all applies. And Pythagoras taught that 3 is the first true number. And that makes those statements make sense in describing a unified trinity.
So where does that bring us? Are we is there anything else, Scott, before we get on to world mind, that you want to mention in terms of just closing this particular, because we did go on there, didn't we?
I think
in that particular video
that covers the flavor of universal mind, and there's more detail in the book that we can't get to everything, but I think that should give you an idea and a feeling for the quality of universal mind and why it's an attractive domain to experience. Maybe I'll just read this last paragraph here that kind of relates this to sacred geometry.
Lovely,
So
lovely.
The activity of self-reflection in universal mind, eternally and non-locally, points to awareness. Therefore, we experience the sacredness of geometry because it is imbued with the qualities of the transcendentals.
And the way I understand that, Scott, is that, it's like, if we're going to go on a journey of self-discovery or, our transformation or whatever, then geometry is a good sort of vehicle to choose. And why is it a good reason to choose? Because it actually goes all the way out to the deepest layers of reality, and actually is the pattern of the intelligence that creates the whole, cosmic game, if you like, so it really is it's a excellent choice in terms of, if you're to become a good chooser, you're beginning to come into harmony with an intelligence that kind of, it's as deep as it gets. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, and I feel like our role, in guiding people to experience sacred geometry, is to connect their soul directly with the universal mind. So we're not so much teachers as guides who are just trying to get you to make that connection from your soul to universal mind.
That's a beautiful point to make, actually, Scott. We should make that at the beginning of every video, to be honest, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. Because I think what we've learned is none of this has any value, actually, unless somebody gets to experience it within themselves, as themselves, in whatever way is meaningful for them. And then it's a game changer. So It's kind of,
a lot of people, when they are looking for information about a subject, they just want to get that data, and they want to get those conceptions, and they want to understand this area. But to me, that's very tedious and very there's a lot of information you can look around and find, but it doesn't really do it for me. What does it, what really transforms a person, is when they can learn to make that connection all the way from their soul to the uppermost level of all of this complexity, which is the
intelligible,
the intelligible domain, the universal mind, and you could call that God in a way, but I think that's just a way of personifying universal mind, because universal mind is within awareness. God is within you, and you have access to that domain. because you are awareness, and you are the actor that made the finite in the first place. Yeah. So you have every right to experience any aspect of it.
Yeah, you know, I love that. Wow. I mean, that's actually, that's a beautiful refresher for like why we're doing this whole trip of Sacred Geometry Academy. That's it, basically, right there. You know, we're trying to be guides on the road to say,
if this was a few hundred years ago, we would have been burned at the stake for claiming such things. And thankfully,
I would just say it wasn't me, it was all Scott. That's what I'd say. Well, look, thank you, everybody. I hope that made some sense, and forgive us if we get lost in the choppy waters of it sometimes, you know, but what we're trying to do here is to speak aloud of the sort of the details of the book, so that it kind of like brings it home to you in a conversational style. So we're hoping that this will kind of, you know, a few pennies might drop for you and go, all right, cool, I kind of get what these guys are vibing about. So that's our hope. If it's going good so far and you've watched the video this far, I'm sure you're on board, and looking forward to sharing the second video of this chapter with you in the next video. See you there.
See you then.